All right, welcome to the Bridge Podcast. This is episode 60. Today I'm joined by guitarist, improviser, composer, Timuçin Şahin. Timuçin, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I start off these conversations asking about people's coffee habits, and I know that you made a point of getting your coffee. And I saw in the liner notes for your new album that everybody seems to be drinking coffee in a picture. Could you tell us, to start off, just a little bit about your coffee habits?
Oh my God, this is we have a saying in guitar world, like being a gear slut, but I can also put that for coffee. Like we talk about gears in detail, but coffee is very important for me. I come from Turkey, so there's sort of a Turkish coffee culture, but I really fell in love with coffee when I moved to Holland. They were like drinking like 10 cups a day back in the beginning of the 90s. There weren't so much caffeine awareness back then. But now I'm trying a lot of things, different beans. Here in US, we got all these great things with like some mushroom, like lion's mane and chaga, like mixed. I'm just trying if I like this and that. And I make my coffee in this old school espresso machines. There's a special name I forgot, but I'm very basic in that. It has to be really fresh. Yeah, and basically I also mix the beans of Colombia and Brazil, so I like that kind of 20 to 80% flavor. It's not too strong. But I drink every day. I don't know if I skipped a day since the last 10-15 years.
Yeah, I've only skipped a few days the past 10 or 15 years by force, but I don't recommend it. What's the coffee scene in Holland like?
The coffee scene in Holland, I mean, I don't know right now what is it, because I don't live there, but they were filtering a coffee. They were putting a filtered coffee, and it was waiting on that like whole cup, and then they were like pouring it whenever they wanted. The years that I immigrated, but nowadays you have all these machines. It got the technology also gotten better. But I'm still the old school guy, doing it with my espresso machines. Like it's just the labor. I like also how much I put it, how it's squeezed. In Holland, they have a lot of coffees with like milk. They call one thing, they call a coffee called koffie verkeerd, which is like wrong coffee. It has a lot of milk in it, so that's the wrongness of the thing. I drink mine black straight, so nothing in it. Yeah.
Good man. Cool. Well, I mean, I'm glad that you're also on Team Coffee. So I guess to get into the album, Funk Poems for Bird, I am very sort of intrigued to hear more about this. And starting off, I know that you're into the M-bass sort of scene from like Steve Coleman. Can you sort of talk a little bit about how that went into this album?
I think the music I wrote back in 2000s, a lot of rhythmic material came from Carnatic music idea. So before M-bass, it was that thing for me, like the polyrhythm, polypulses from South India. It was like a magnetic experience for me to study that. 4 or 5 years, I would say, maybe 3, 4, whatever. I also composed a lot of music based on in South Indian forms, raga and tala modulations, basically metrical and melodic modulations. Like I wrote really true composed pieces back in the day, so I get that. I have that rhythmic material in me, and I mean I admire M-bass a lot. I play with a lot of musicians who participated in that movement. Mainly Greg Osby, Robin Eubanks is in my first album, and all other people here. I use like Tashan Sori, Marcus Gilmore a couple of times, Matt Brewer, Thomas Morgan. All these people were in Steve's band, and of course Sean Rickman and Reggie. They're kind of maybe the more veterans in creating that sound. So the distinct philosophy, that musical philosophy that Steve and other people brought into the music is, is very special. The African American musical utterance being the main locomotive in that. Plus, it's open to other cultures. It's a great habitat to structure different kind of musical organisms. So, and that kind of gelled with what I'm doing. And whenever I get to play with anybody from that habitat, it just feels very easy, in terms of the places that we can go to. So it didn't really happen only on this album. Even in my first album, it's you hear more elements of rhythmic complexity. I would say this has little less of that compared with the other albums. Like the first album, Silk Road, when I was very young, of course. It was right in the middle of that period. The second album, Window for My Bread, which Kai Eckhart is playing. I mean, in the first record, I had this great mridangam player. He's very famous now, BC Manjunath, my brother. An Iranian percussion player from Sovizada, two percussions, Robin Eubanks and Hein van der Geijn, a really weird setup, sounding, really exploring that rhythmical territory. Second album, the same. The third album also, Buffa, it's the same with Tyshawn Thomas and John O'Gallagher. So I think this album has much less of that M-bass vibe. I think because Şahin and Reggie are in it, there's this strong shadow of the M-bass, maybe, I would say.
Gotcha. And I know that, so I mean, the band is Flow State, and then it's Funk Poems specifically. And so I'd be curious to hear, first of all, when you say flow state, are you talking about the sort of like psychology term, put forth by like Csikszentmihalyi and those people?
Yeah, definitely. And also it went a little further than that. The record before this one, Nothing Bad Can Happen, that is called also Timuçin Şahin's Flow State. So the concept actually arises those years, like 2016, 17. That's a very concentrated music, a lot of true composed parts. It's with Corey again on piano, Tom Rainey on drums, and Chris Tordini on bass. It's more of a chamber jazz kind of thing. Has this lot of new music influences. The idea was that the psychological aspect kind of branched out to slow state versus default trance state, that you're actually, that we all more or less right now are exposed to, and a little bit forced to live in a kind of oblivion, than really being immersed in the moment and just really, I mean, that album really went deep in that philosophy in terms of like, I have a trilogy in that album. Only 3 free impro tunes, like Flow State 1, 2, 3 has this resurrection, part 2, reconstruction, third, coexistence, has this kind of like how you achieve to that flow state coming out of that default trance by like resurrecting, reconstructing, and then coexisting in the same mental habitat. So and since I have Corey in this album also, this musical friendship, relationship, and the mental headspace that we both can achieve at the same time collectively, also kind of bleed into this record, So I wanted to keep the same name, keep the same philosophy also, and kind of added another parameter of funk with Şahin and Reggie, and then glue it to the music of Charlie Parker, with the flow being the common denominator, basically.
Very cool. I'm curious to like know what is exactly meant by funk, because you can certainly name, like James Brown or whatever funk artist you want, but in terms of like a sort of more technical musical definition, Like, how would you sort of explain your conception of like funk rhythm, or just like what it means to have funk in your music technically?
Yeah. So two things. Definitely the rhythm section elements. Sean and Reg, they are the funk. I don't know if Sean still has the same phone number. Back in the day, his phone, the last 4 digits was funk. That was his. They come straight out of funk. Even they do a lot of other incredible stuff. And I mean, funk means for me definitely flow, which actually coincides with what, like the main musical critical feature, which is central to me. It's the like also in bebop you have the flow. In every great music you have the flow. In that regard, Varése also can cohabitate with this thing because he's always talking about flow. I know maybe that's the other question that you will get to, because I've been talking about Varése's and Charlie Parker's relationship. So he thought his dream or admiration to achieve a sound world that flows like a river. That's another thing. And funk has its in its nature. It's like that's mainly James Brown is a big influence for everybody. For each of us, that nobody can sing like him still. Like Michael Jackson came very close. Prince, like these people, and they created their own wonderful universes. But like there's one James Brown, is that thing is, it's so authentic and unique and still special. For me, the power and yet the poetry in the same kind of in the same musical world that can easily exist as funk. When you think about funk, you can get easily into this trance state. People think anything that is repetitive or has some kind of ostinato, but it's the fine tunings and the details are so important. I wouldn't dare to sit on authentic funk band, to be honest, because I have so much respect. I mean, I probably will do an okay job, but it's a it's a very deep thing for me. And it's also like, it's a very, I think it's the most protest music, more it used, I mean, this historical thing that it carried out towards the years, like all these funk artists, the impact they brought, it's still alive. When you go back to 60s of funk, 70s of funk, 80s of funk, they all have a lot to say, and subliminally or very explicitly. So yeah, funk is huge. It's also difficult to name an album putting that thing, as you just said, you like everything can be funk, but I think the sound of this is kind of proves that this has funk is a central element in this music.
To compare funk to something like swing, where swing, like people might sum it up as like, oh, you take 2/8 notes and it becomes these triplet eighth notes. That's sort of like basic just description of like that rhythmic transformation. And then you realize swing is actually like something deeper than that. Is there something that you would sort of define funk as in terms of like that micro rhythmic quality that makes it like feel particularly good, like because it doesn't seem to be precisely metronomic, but it's like kind of better than precisely metronomic, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think a great deal of music has that kind of quality, better than precisely metronomic thing. I mean, you have that also in like some in Carnatic music, in a lot of vernacular musics, that the interpretation of the feel and the time. David Liebman always says about swing, it's not a point in time, but it's an area in time. It's like a rubber band thing. But you have that thing also in a like the first thing I teach my students of jazz is like, where is the beat? You know, like who plays in the middle of the beat? Where's the rhythm section? Who's behind? You know, these are kind of your go-tos. Like Usual Suspects is Miles in the middle, Coltrane is a little bit front, Sonny and Dexter is a little bit behind. I mean, Sonny's sometimes being in the front. But when it's like a straight groove, this still also exists. Great funk drummers have that, you know. Also, like James Brown is, a lot of things are more very much centered, but like new ways of funk plays is always like, you know, pushing it. So in the record we have 2 tracks just came out in the studio. For example, the Reggie and Sean, they laid out this deadly slow funk beat. It's like, it's very difficult to play, you know. And I entitled one of them Flows Vibe for the band, and then second one is 11 to 15 hours a day. That's how much Charlie Parker used to practice when he was young. So especially that track, 11 to 15 hours a day, that's a really hard track to play on, you know, that. And to keep that kind of momentum and the great musical tension with or without releasing it, it's an art. So that's, as I said, it's a deep thing. The tempo is very decisive. How are you going to play something, you know, like how it feels. And of course, you can paint a lot of pictures. I mean, the frame and the palette is so important. You could go Mark Rothko, or you could go Jackson Pollock on it, you know. It's just like this. Then the main goal is that music has to become really organic in whatever thing you want to put on. Like it could be swing, or like if things are kind of if you have this ambiguous quality, that what's happening, what's going on there, is that guitar or piano, you know. Like I think we are achieving that things. It's more like this sticks and strings kind of music than keys and stuff, you know, like the how piano and guitar is like coming into existence is sometimes it's, you know, is that Corey or is that me? This is very hard to achieve with 2 different instruments. So so more than the question of like how funk came into the picture here, is like how we actually use that palette of funk and created some kind of an organic musical painting, I would say.
Okay. I guess you know, you mentioned Varése, and I was unaware of Charlie Parker's interest in Varése, and I was, you know, wondering sort of like about the research that went into this album. But it seems like there's a, you know, great deal of like reverence for Bird in the album, but like it doesn't seem over researched. And I'm curious, just like what went into this, like you know, research wise. Like there's still that degree of spontaneity. It doesn't seem like overly, you know, like it doesn't seem like it's about reading biographies or something like that. It's like a very pure translation of something you know, that he was doing into a modern idiom.
Yeah. So there are 2 main ideas about why I brought up that relationship, because I mean, insiders knew that, you know, like quite a deal. It's a little bit known now than 10 years before, but the main thing is we don't think about Charlie Parker in those terms. We tend to think like John Coltrane and other like avant-gardists, like, you know, Cecil Taylor, Ornette Coleman, about like when we include, if you are recalibrating avant-garde by inclusion of the great Black American artists, you know, Charlie Parker and his associates are more mentioned in the bebop tradition, that postulation, you know, like Kenny Clark and etc., Thelonious Monk. That was kind of the first intervention, I would say, you know, like the first big penetration to the musical uh, to the musical system or the canon back in the day, you know, that this is an art music, this is really virtuosic, and this has all the aesthetics that art music, you know, this is nothing less than Beethoven, nothing less than Stockhausen, etc., etc. We are doing this, and we're not people's pleasers. You can be entertained by this music or whatever, but we're not entertainers, we are artists. And they proved that, Parker and his associates. Then I think thanks to their first penetration or iteration, whatever you want to call, people, now we could mention people like, I don't know, Cecil Taylor, John Coltrane, and all the others, the people who came after them, their successors. We started to include them in the avant-garde, but it was Bird, it was Parker who actually kind of opened the gates to that. You know, he opened a lot of channels, and he wanted this a lot. You know, Parker, before mentioning his admiration to Varése and Stravinsky, he always made something else. I mean, his life is so short, incredibly super short, and it's you know, he's an interesting figure. He's that's why, like Martin Daughtry, he said like he could hear more future in the present by doing something else. You know, like if you look at his strings, few recordings, if you look at his even his sessions, you know, back in the day, there was a, I forgot his name. There was a fan of him recording his sessions. Like it's now on internet. Like he sent Nick sessions. Like he's playing tunes on a really wild manner that he did not explore during the studio sessions. Like big jumps, you know, like sort of a little bit like Eric Dolphish things that he was doing, you know. So and he wanted to study with Varése. There's this interviews online right now. He says he would love to write for bigger ensembles, Bird is very humble, and he's very intellectual, but his language is very poor, very pure. I'm sorry, his language is very pure. He says like, he's going. I think he's going to accept me, Edgard Varése, this great French composer, as his pupil. I would love to be a student. And then I think it's an interview that he does with Dave Brubeck, and Brubeck asks him, "Are you going to stop playing?" And he says, "No, I'm never going to give up my horn." That kind of great thing. And then Varése also talks about Bird. Like there's this young black saxophone player. I'm really interested in how he plays. He wants to study with me, but that collaboration never materialized because Varése went to a premiere to Paris, and then Bird died at the same time. So just the fact that, I mean, now in retrospect, we look at this music, we consumed it so much and we made a culture out of it. You know, there are schools, we teach jazz everywhere, etc., which is great. But the essence was that he would not do the same thing. I mean, Coltrane kind of proved that. He had 7 years longer. He lived 7 years longer than Bird. He proved that. I mean, where he started was really the tradition. You know, he was Johnny Hodges' apprentice. He played with Gillespie and stuff. He did things, you know, giant steps, his quartet, and then where he ended up with Meditations in Interstellar Space with 2 drums and playing free with his other, you know. So you see that he did not do the same thing again. So I mean, following their footsteps, I think they're the real avant-gardists, you know. And Parker did not have that chance that much, but he actually left us enough mental material to contemplate on how to move forward. As you know, as the creators of today, it's our intellectual necessity to go back and look at it, you know, and then look at his music as how he could potentially, how would he do things, and how we should kind of move forward. So he gave us a incredible mental legacy we don't really talk about that much. You know, we talk about his musical legacy, which we should keep doing it, but that's why I would like to emphasize that also. Yeah, these are basically the 2 main reasons that I wanted to put forward with this album also.
Interesting. You mentioned the song 11 to 15 hours a day, and when I read that title, it was immediately evident what you were talking about. And I feel like I've glorified this idea of like like marathon sort of gauntlet woodshed sessions. But I'm curious if you have any insight into what that actually looks like, and I'm curious to hear a little bit about like what the sort of gauntlet woodshed looks like in your life or in Flow State's life.
You mean like practicing 11 to 15 hours a day?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an amazing fantasy, right?
Right.
I don't think I've ever had that volume of practice, unfortunately. But I had my fair share back in the day, like did some serious hours. Now because of life and travel and all other responsibilities,
Mhm.
I if I find time, I'm not going to, I'll just grab that time and then spend time with my ex. So it's a when you're younger, music and its complexities forces you to work on them, and then it becomes kind of this main thing. I'm able to do it. I'm not able to do it. I would like to play with that. I don't sound all kinds of stuff going in and out of your head. Nowadays, it's just like music is rescuing me from all other life problems. It's just uh, I'm not saying I'm able to do what I want to do still. That's not. I'm not talking about self complacency or being content with what I'm doing. It's just the idea of bonding with your instrument,
Mhm.
and it could be the most basic thing that everybody knows to practice, or something that you create to move, like um, I don't know. Um, it's an interesting thing. That's why if you ask any musician who is on a serious level with creativity and um, the greatness of what we do is there is no end to discovery.
Mhm.
You know, I'm am I a veteran in the field or not? I don't know. I'm reaching my 50s. I'm in a few years I'll be 50. So still I feel like I'm going and coming here. I'm in Harlem today. Tomorrow I'll be somewhere else, playing in New York, going back to Turkey, trying to make ends meet at some point. But it's just because there is no end to discover new musical experiences and create some sound world that actually kind of matters to you. So practicing is one of them, definitely.
Mhm.
So it's not anymore practicing. It's actually the path to discovery, I would say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, Bird's ability to practice that long, I feel like there has to have been some, element of just like being under the influence that allowed that to happen. But like, do you have any insight in terms of like how somebody actually does that? Because that's a wonderful fantasy, as you said, but like I kind of have to doubt that anybody these days could ever do that.
Yeah. Like, look, we let our time stolen by a lot of things. We're also uh, complicit in that.
Hmm.
So, but because of that, we are able to do other stuff. Like now, you and I can connect through internet that we did not have. He did not have back in the day.
Right.
So so like that's when I started studying music. I realized like there were much less distractions. There was no internet. There was, but like it wasn't accessible. Like I like the first time I wrote an email was like a revolutionary thing for me. So I did not have a computer for a long time. Um, we were mailing things. I remember. Yeah. So when you have a lot of time when you don't have that much of distraction, it's just things are easier. And now because of the technological stuff and the music is being disseminated much on a much faster frequency, it has also a lot of advantages too. Like things. I think any young musician living in this age is progressing 5, 6, 10 times faster than I used to. Like especially on a technical level.
Hmm.
I see like these young cats like doing this amazing technical stuff, etc. But but still, I mean, this is our story of this generation, that I can relate with Bird. Like I've been in this time that there was no internet and less distraction. And when I was a kid in Turkey, I came from a small village. It's not a big city. I remember when the first TV came to our houses. It was black and white. You had to like open it, you had to turn it on here, and here there was something called regulator, and it was only 4 hours a day. That was like it. So I can easily relate with my parents and my grandparents' life. When first time I flew, I was 19, and I flew to Holland to study conservatory, to go, I had to have a reason to be on an airplane, like it's a major reason. That was the first time I was leaving the country. Like my grandmother, she never flew. All these people, now you're an unusual person if you did not have a flight trip. So it's for us now, it's unthinkable to be dedicated on something for so long. That's why we have meditation apps and stuff, just to kind of, put our minds. That's a little bit about what flow state means also. It's just a reference to, I mean, I didn't come up with this term. I was inspired by this term, but why I was inspired, because it's definitely, it's directly related to the art form that you and I are in. This like this music making. The act of music making is such a deep experience, and it's not only like contemplating on it, playing together on it, but also spending your time, like you're discovering something from yourself. I think it's an unbelievable discipline. Nobody's forcing you to do that. Just like it's an abstraction for a lot of people why you're doing this. So I don't know if I made sense to your question, but
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, all right.
I don't know how much of a question it was. So I was reading the liner notes, and I mentioned Corey's sort of technologically retuned piano,
Right.
and I'd be curious to hear a little bit about that. But also, for listeners who aren't familiar with your playing, you play a double neck guitar.
Right.
One of the necks is a fretless 7-string or baritone, depending.
Yeah.
And so you have this relationship with like sort of less discrete pitch choice. It's more continuous, and coming from Turkey, there's like Turkish makam and all this sort of microtonality. So I'm just curious to hear about. I mean, I never really thought about how Bird plays sharp occasionally, but I'd be curious to hear you talk about sort of like microtonality in this record and Bird and your playing generally.
Right. To start with, what Corey does, he has this little thing. It's an acoustic thing. He puts it inside the piano, and when he activates it, it kind of changes. So he's not the piano is not detuned. I don't know what that thing called, and he doesn't like to talk about that when I ask him a question. So I kind of leave him alone on that field. But the important thing is, it's really like he's an amazing musician, and we bond on a lot of musical aspects together. What microtonality means to me, it meant a lot of things to me when I was in the beginning of 2000s, because of Carnatic music. It didn't start out with Turkish music. So when I got into Carnatic music, this with polyrhythms and polypulses, the concept of microtonality came in also into the picture. So I started playing fretless guitar, took the frets out of my regular one of my guitars, and then doing some Indian ragas and stuff. And then that actually triggered my Turkish heritage or DNAs, So I realized I was ignorant on that aspect, and I studied some Turkish music on my own. But I kind of parted from that because I don't play anything based on makam or something, and also I don't want to. I have a personal sound world and personal musical system, and that does not include that sound world. I'm still inspired by that, especially the old cats. There are like some amazing musicians back in like Necdet Yaşar, a great tambur player, Tamburi Cemil Bey. Those guys, when you hear them improvise, it's like they put you in a really in a place that you want to reside for a long time, you know. So also one other aspect apart from the microtonality was still connecting with what we just talked about a minute ago. For example, in South India, concerts last 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours, you know, like people go and then listen and then like stay connected with that. In all the Turkish music traditions, all this improvisations, also they tend to last really long. And not only the players, but also people who are witnessing that are getting into that kind of zone. So maybe it has to do with that. So that Indian culture made me reconnect with my own culture, which I did not explore before. But I don't look at microtonality from a point of a lot of people do. Some people really explore hard on that. You know, they use specific tuning systems, etc. Mine is very intuitive, you know. Sometimes it's accidental, I have to admit, you know, but like I kind of the aspect of spontaneity is to make that another great sounding discrete object on that level. So so basically I don't think about my fretless guitar separated from my fretted guitar. I run the both necks at the same time. I have it with me, with my main guitar actually. Here, I can show it to you. So this is the 7th string, and this is the 6th. This has like a regular tuning, and this has this. I have a hidden cello here, and F#1. I don't know how much you're hearing it. I can plug it in. I have a funny amp, but
sure, if you want to. We can't really hear much, but
yeah, just I'm not going to play, but just letting, or just for a second. So this is a regular 6th string, and I sometimes run both necks with these pitches, and then this is
interesting. Okay.
So this goes very, very low. This F#1. So I have this hidden cello here, and this too is always changing. Sometimes I go 5th up, and I have to break 2 or 3 sets to make it sound well, because sometimes it sounds wobbly. Sometimes, so I have to use more than 1 sets. And on that record, I use another guitar, another double neck. It's both of them are 6th string, and they're completely tuned in 5ths, whole tone apart. The fretless is from C, starts from C, and the fretted starts from B flat.
Interesting.
So like 11 to 15 hours flows wide. The opening track, Homage, I use that. Sixth Sense of the Platypus, I use that. I use in more than 1, 4 tunes, I think. More than half of the record, I use that one. This is also the first record that I produced in Turkey. I have my own guitars because I'm not living in New York anymore. I don't have the space issue. So I have my own guitars, my own amps, you know. So with this kind of tuning, I also have to have bigger speakers. At least one of the amps has this. So I don't want to get too technical. I don't know. Maybe you like me
please
to
get as technical as you like.
Okay, yeah. Your audience probably are a lot of guitar players. I use like 4x12 Marshall cab with one, and just because the low end can come out clearly, you know. When I was living in America, in New York, I didn't have any chance to store all this equipment. So so this was a good opportunity that I was able to do that. Let me turn this off. Yeah.
When did you make the decision to sort of dive into double neck guitars? And I assume, not all of your guitars are double necks, right? Or are they?
No, I have single necks too.
Okay. Yeah, like when I first sort of encountered your music, I thought of Kai Eckhart and sort of like that trio era of like Trio Eckhart 2 and John McLaughlin, and then I realized that you have an album with Kai Eckhart, and I was very into that as well. But like that's a big decision, and I became a 7-string guitarist recently, and it was a huge deal for me to get that extra string. But another neck is like a whole other world,
right?
And you aren't doing it in a gimmicky way whatsoever.
Yeah. I'm not the first double neck guitar player, of course not. You know, we have the Jimmy Page vibe in the rock world and stuff. You know, and then John McLaughlin had it for years. That record is also one of my favorite records. Well, when I started out playing that, I got the cassette of it, that Royal Festival Hall, John McLaughlin and Turlock. That's for me like I think that's my favorite John McLaughlin record ever. You know, I like him very much, but after that record, nothing is kind of coming to, I don't know, like maybe because he's playing with plectrum on the nylon string and he's such a gentleman, this English vibe, but also very powerful, you know. And I think there's a lot to be said about that record. And I think Turlock is in his best also, like the amount of the material that like he's doing is so amazing. For me it was and it's interesting how I approached Kai. I was very young. I sent him my very first record before Silk Road. I said, would you like to play with me and stuff? And he said, oh, this is great, I would love to. And then our friendship started, and then we made that record. But I think double neck started during those years for me. It was still a research project, basically. I mean, in Turkey, we have a huge tradition started by Erkan Uğur. He's like the fretless guitar hero there, mainly playing through makam. He's like exploring the Turkish makams. Most of his music is about that. But my music is not about that, you know. So when I started out, it's still I wasn't using both necks at the same time, or not seeing this as a 13-string instrument, but it was just, I'm now playing fretless, now I'm playing fretted. Now actually I don't really care. So it's just that kind of transformation is more interesting for me. I think it kind of makes who I am than anybody else who's playing this formation, like fretted fretless configuration. So and that actually is happening last 10 years, I would say, since my record Inherence. I'm seeing them as like a widened palette of a widened musical palette that actually has a lot to say. I mean, fretless has this vocal quality, you know, but the fretted meant so much to me after I started playing fretless, because you have this precision, you know, like it's so direct. Also the choice of wood and the pickups and the amp and everything, you know, like the concept of sound became much deeper for me after I started modifying the instrument, because when I was playing the standard one neck, I took everything for granted. You plug it and you play. It's more about the chords and the lines and everything you do. But once you start thinking about sound and modifying your own sound, etc., even the regular 6-string fretted became differently, because you look from a point of orchestration rather than instrumentation only, you know. So in that sense, like the stuff that I do in my composed works became also much more or they start to be in more dialogue with how I play the instrument, or vice versa. Both influence a lot. Like there's this great American composer, Morton Feldman, who was a big influence in me. Like him, John Cage, and the other New York school guys, mainly Cage and him, what they did was first they found the instruments and then they wrote the notes, or they found the notes. Whether in the regular composed tradition, it's first you sit on the piano or whatever instrument, you find the chords and the notes and whatever you want to do, and then you distribute it to an orchestra. You know, they did totally different. Like with Cage doing that with prepared piano is a great example of that. He modified every key, and then piano became 88 key percussion instrument. So it's not compared with what he did. What I am doing is nothing close to that, or there's nothing. I wouldn't say there's nothing revolutionary about it. It's just like seeing an instrument from an instrumentation or an orchestration or both. So it's yeah. So even it started like mid 2000 or beginning 2000. I think recently I'm getting the best out of the both worlds at this moment, and I'm really looking forward what I can discover further.
Very cool. When you play, I mean, like there's like this sort of like very diverse range of timbres that you're using. Like, I mean, I feel like you're doing stuff harmonically that I can't really put my finger on. And like reading through the liner notes, I saw stuff about like inverting Charlie Parker's lines and sort of this like Schoenbergian influence. And I'm curious, just like as an improviser, like I assume you aren't thinking, C major 7 going to A dominant. I mean, maybe you are at some points, but like, what does that sort of like internal conception of pitch space and like, harmonic material, pitch sets, what does that look like for you?
I mean, on this record specifically, if you're asking it's much more intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
I think Martin Daughtry was I'm really grateful that he did those great liner notes. He's an
Mm-hmm.
unbelievable scholar that I always wanted to emulate when I was studying at NYU. So we had a talk before he wrote those things. Like, what do you think? Where's this, etc. Like very honest and open talk how I think about this. So one of the things I employ when I compose is really the basic pitch set stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
love it. Like, and how if you apply towards, if you filter through this instrumentation point of view, and then maybe intervene it later on with your intuition and your ears, it just becomes one of the powerful musical tools in your arsenal. That's that being one. And secondly, like I gave him some hints in a couple of things. For example, like After Bird is based on a tune called Aprovav by Parker. Is I'm just using the rhythmic frame of the melody. The theme is totally transported in a way which I don't remember how I did it. I kind of don't take notes how I like it sound, and then I kind of later on intervened whatever I was doing it. So there is an element of New York school. There's like this, and there's an element of probability by Xenakis, for example. There's an element of VNA school. I'm a product of everything I love. So I wouldn't hesitate to employ any of these things on any kind of musical opportunity. So yeah, that's how free I am looking at a musical object, I would say. For example, like Bird Watchers is based or inspired by a tune called Ornithology by Parker. You can also see it in the titles a little bit. What does ornithologists do, basically? They're like, before analyzing instinct, they first watch birds, right? So like it has a bunch of subliminal things. We all would like to watch Parker also, like, and a couple of other things you have in there. Confirmation on 26-2, there's this connection with him and John Coltrane, and I played another solo confirmation on the record. So if I look at harmony, I'm not going to just like think about, as you say, G7 is going to A7 or whatever. It's just everything has its place. That's beautiful too. But I mean, we live in 2022.
Yeah.
A lot of things happened. So, and then given that these guys took us to different time spans in that very short times, in their very short life, that's again, it's our intellectual necessity to move the music forward with being true to you know, to its roots, definitely, you know.
One of the most impactful moments for me as a guitarist, I think, was when I was in college, and I sent an email to Ben Monder, trying to like study with him, and he basically sent me back this list of how he practices with, you know, like permutations of various 4-note chords. And I feel like I've been working on that, you know, for the past like 15 years. And so similarly, I imagine that you have some sort of way of implementing these pitch class sets, or I mean, like, I guess I'm just curious how, like, what shedding this type of stuff looks like for you, because, you know, with like, you know, 4-note chords, there's so many permutations, like it's only 24 per 4-note chord, but that's already so much when you do, you know, all 12 keys, and then you do like non-tertian chords, and it's just overwhelming. So I'm curious how you actually like sort of digest that material and
Right.
make it intuitive.
Yeah, it's I think that's a great question. I think all your questions are, if you look at the how this conversation unfolds, they're all related, you know, like practicing this and that, etc. Like maybe because he could practice 15 to 12, 11 to 15 hours a day was because like practicing is not one thing. It's just you can create your own practice. It could be really personal, and it could be also influential. You could get influenced by another guitarist, another instrument, another discipline, you know. Whenever I'm doing something besides music, for example, because I'm not, let's say I'm in a kind of advanced level with the music, but if I play basketball, for example, you know, like I see how they do drills, etc., or boxing, like it's a lot of things are based on repetition in any skill,
Mhm.
but like how incremental you do evolve by doing the same thing, but also every time little different and every time little more additions, you know, the choreography that goes into that, you know, like all the footwork goes into that, you know. Now I just gave them examples of boxing and basketball because those are the two sports I like and I kind of try to do all the combinations. And then when you are in a game situation, how you interact with people. So all these things are basically, you are developing a sort of muscle memory, and all the choreography that you're doing inside that is like preparing you to that and beyond. What I love about practicing is stuff that you practice 10 years before sometimes can come out back to your practice routine, or it can just like emerge on the stage, you
Mhm.
know, on a like a really abstract way. So it's very personal, you know, like you're filtering through like I'm very interested in Ben Monder's like 4-note stuff that he's been doing. You have to do it for years. Please send me that list, you know. So I'm like swapping notes between musicians. That's what I try to tell my students also. Uh, there's a saying: you swap notes, iron sharpening iron, right?
Mhm.
That's so it's with every skill. It is abstract, but you can make it more real, you know. You can it just becomes tactile after a while. You can really touch like a musical sound. It's like it's so close to you, you know. It's like because you familiarize it so much, you worked on it so much, it's like you see it, you like it, and then you play, you don't even think about it, like you kind of separate yourself, you know. I'm sure you have those moments also, and then you're very much connected with everything else going on. Practicing is not to get better only on the instrument, but also it's like it allows you to be free and flexible. You know, you can only be flexible when uh, when you're super familiar and internalize the stuff so much. So, and after I don't really think about if I'm thinking about something or not on the stage. Like, you know, like yes, there's a lot of worked out stuff that I'm doing. You know, like I've been working on this for a while, so I'm trying that. I'm trying if it's going to, but it's not. It's not going to decide. Definitely not going to dominate or decide which direction the music can. The music will take. So I trust more the sound and the space and the musicianship that is happening on the spot. and practicing is I leave that out when I go on stage. That was your question, probably, right? Like I kind of try to leave it out, you know, because it definitely comes back to you. If you do it enough, it's you don't have to worry about it, you know, like oh, I'm detaching. It will come back to you. It's I think music is a very loyal field. If you have enough talent and if you spend enough time on it, it's going to pay off. It's a great friend, you know. You can really rely on it. The hours that you put on into something, it I don't know. It never. I haven't seen anybody thinking differently. I worked so much on this and then it's not working, unless you worked on the wrong thing or in a way that is not serving the musical purpose of what you're doing. So I don't really worry about if it's intuitive or if it's coming natural or something. It does come natural. Yeah.
We're at an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time. To just end on a last question, I guess, you know, I don't remember if this was in your conversation with Dan or the line in your notes, but there's a lot of talk of like the sort of tactile feeling of flow. And sort of as our flow aficionado, I'm curious if you can sort of give me a little bit more of a sense of what that tactile quality is.
Yeah, I just mentioned like 10 seconds ago. It's like when you're immersed in the music so much that it's like it's almost. I think that the first time I heard about the tactile quality in the music was Takemitsu talking about Feldman's music, because his stuff is like, you can really see it, right? It's like vertical, right? A lot of music. He plays a chord and he focuses on the decay. And I thought, yeah, that's how one musical organism come into existence and leaves us. But it stays lingering in your head also, you know? So that's something, the tactile meant this for me. For example, we think that acoustic gives us all the answers. It gives so many answers, but not all, you know, like, for example, I have tinnitus, right? It's real for me. That sound that I hear all my life, it's just as real for any sound that I'm hearing. It's so what about that, you know, all these earworms we have, etc. So when Cage talked about sound and space, I think he also meant this, that this, you know, all this experience, this is carrying with us. So I'm more referring to how things solidify for us in the reality, you know, something abstract as sound, you know, it's the most abstract art form. You don't see it, you can't touch it, like you want to, like with a painting, you can go back and do whatever you want to do with it, but only with sound. That's why it's probably more intimidating, you know, since it's the most abstract thing. Like, I mean, everybody is like, you know, in MoMA, it's a modern art museum. Every day, 8,000 people are visiting that. You know, how many people are like visiting a new music concert, or you know, when there's a huge asymmetry in that. How we and I think part of it is sound is very abstract. So it's a little metaphor for me that is actually, yes, it's abstract, but towards the years, I feel like I can touch it. You know, that's like, and this with all the people who influenced me, and particularly for this record, like all this choir of funk, starting from Brown and Charlie Parker and Varése, that's like, it became so personal. And then it's also my music. I actually put this thing together. We co-created this music with these people, so it just become so real for us. So we can touch it, not by our hands, but we can still. It's tactile, you know. I don't know if it does make sense, but I think it does, you know, because I mean, you're a musician who's been immersed with what you're doing for so long. I mean, the disadvantage we have against the visual artists that, you know, it's a different kind of relationship we have.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah.
Well, again, the album is Funk Poems for Bird. Is there anything else you want to talk about or mention about the album?
Well, I'm thinking about recording the second part of this. It's coming into our talks more and more. I would like to record one more session with this band, maybe keep this band, because that's, again, back in the days, you had bands as jazz musicians too. Now we kind of indulge because there are so many great musicians. Every project we have like different people. So I would like to see how long and what kind of a musical line we could create. So that's one thing. Second, yeah, I'm curious how this music will resonate in 10 years also. So I think we kind of created some kind of a timeless sound. So I'm always curious how one record means after so many years to me and to other people. So yeah, go and get it. It's on Bandcamp. I'm in New York playing a concert this Monday with Corey Smythe, who's on and Tom Rainey. Basically, that's like the first Flow State 1.0 minus Chris Tordini. Chris won't be with us, so it's a bassless trio at Drum. So if you're in the New York area, come and check that out. And then in the middle of winter, we have a tour, hopefully in Europe, with the Flow State group. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for talking to me, Timuçin. This has been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll talk in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.